Hello, and welcome to Open Stutter. I'm Vivian Siskin,
And I'm Sarah McIntyre.
and we're here to have coffee and chat today.
I changed up my coffee mug today. Uh, I,
Ooh, it's pretty.
I'm taking a risk, and especially in light of today's topic.
So tell me, Sarah, like if you had one thing to say that is part of your routine in making coffee in the morning, what is the most important part of your routine?
Hmm. So, since I go about it like pretty mathematically, the most important part is weighing the coffee beans and the grinds. So, I weigh exactly 18 grams.
What happens if it's too much or too little?
I take it out. Yeah, or I add to it.
I've
I know.
seen people like you at the supermarket. Yeah, take
Mhm.
off that
I
one
know.
slice of cheese. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, everybody can. I'm giving you all permission to think what you think.
Well, here is my mug.
Let's see. Oh, you win.
Yeah, but the story behind this mug is I bought it because I wanted to see what the definition was on the back,
Hmm.
and it's terrible. It's a terrible definition. So I kind of want to like write the company and give them a non-pathologizing definition. But this one is a speech disorder where the person repeats words and hesitates when speaking, more prominent and common among people when they are listening, lying, speaking in front of a large audience, talking to someone intimidating, involved in a truly traumatizing experience that leaves them scarred for life. So it's a pretty awful mug, but I decided to drink from it today, to be completely honest. This is the first time I'm ever drinking from it. And
I like it.
it will be the last.
And you know what? As long as you just have the front there, we can value that. And then
Go.
we can say there's a lot to be learned and adjusted.
Absolutely. So kick off our topic, Sarah.
Okay, my turn to kick us off. So we thought today we would talk a little bit about shame busting and paradoxical assignments. And we'll break it down, but basically shame busting is kind of intentionally putting yourself in a position to face and experience your sources of shame. So kind of doing what you fear. And paradoxical assignments would be sort of identifying that shame and setting yourself up to experience it rather than trying to stay away from it. So that whole sort of approach drive. And I'm sure we'll break it down further, but I just thought I'd take a stab at a really general overview.
Yeah. And that's really what we're talking about today: the good, the bad, what we do, how we do it, what are some good assignments. For people who are not familiar with the notion of paradoxical assignments, it's not new because I don't want you to think that Sarah and I are coming up, hey, we have a new thing today. It's not new at all. It's maybe 80 years old or maybe even a century old. That's how old it is. And the person credited with the idea was Viktor Frankl, who came up with the idea, and he was a psychologist who came up with the idea of logotherapy. And his notion was paradoxical intention. And the idea is that you do the thing that you fear, just like you say, especially if the anxiety comes from within. So in his day, you would do systematic desensitization if you were afraid of something else, like a spider or something. But if it was your own anxiety about something, then you would do these paradoxical intentions. The idea is that you're breaking up the feedback loop that keeps the anxiety and the fear going on. So, an example of that would be, for example, if you fear that somebody will grimace when you stutter, then the fear of that will increase your fear. The fear of that will increase the chances because you'll probably hold back more. Then, when you experience that, you experience shame. And that shame comes back again, increases the fear. So you're in this loop where the fear increases the anxiety, and the anxiety increases the activity, and the activity increases shame. So this is the intentional production of it is supposed to break that feedback loop. So there we have
Wow, that's really helpful.
it. Yeah, yeah. So
I
not a
read
new
a,
idea. Yeah, not a new
yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Well, I always credit you with it because I've heard of the term busting and paradoxical assignments from you, and I assumed from Sheehan, but
It's
that's good to know.
older than me, if that's possible. Yes.
Okay. Noted, and I will change
Yeah.
my reference source.
Yeah. But also, it's interesting because you'll find that concept throughout psychology. Like it's a big one in Gestalt psychology as well. So people who do Gestalt therapy will talk about the notion of a paradox, going ahead and doing the thing you fear. Yeah.
I sometimes go on the Reddit subthread, the stutter subthread of Reddit, and I was looking up. I was curious when we kind of tossed around what we might talk about today, and just so everyone knows, we just sort of name a topic and then we just see where it goes. This isn't planned out necessarily, but I was just curious to gather maybe more perspectives than my own or just what I've learned, and there was a little bit of history there on the origin of that kind of internal experience setup.
Yeah. Did they mention Viktor Frankl? I'm just curious.
They
Yeah.
mentioned Frankel. I didn't have, it was just a quick paragraph response, and so that person didn't unfortunately give too much, but kind of
Okay.
neat. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So, what about you? Did you engage in much of this personally?
for sure. I think like when we're thinking about different topics to toss around, I think for me, as someone who is a recovering covert person who stutters, I think that that internal belief system and that internal sense of shame was probably the biggest component of my experience and my fear and worry. And so I think shame busting and setting up these paradoxical assignments, not maybe at the immediate get-go, but as I really began to understand what was going to create change and make a difference, I think that they were huge. And I remember it specifically the ordering or while walking up to someone and checking in for a reservation or meeting a new person, and the eye contact aversion being one of those just ingrained and innate worries that pops up, just one of those automatic thoughts of, oh, you need to hurry up before they look away, and if they look away, then they're thinking X, Y, or Z about you because you must be stuttering too long. So I remember eventually setting myself up to stutter long enough in certain contexts to try to get the listener to look away, and sometimes they would, and 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 balancing that and feeling like, okay, yes, this is something to celebrate because this is what I intended to experience, but also accepting that I didn't feel great still just yet. I mean, it that I think is part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this notion that you don't feel great, but you sort of assign a success to it. I think that's part of the whole experience. When I think about shame busting, my first thought is, the idea that, people who stutter have, shame. People like to talk about shame and guilt. We can just review a little bit that um, shame is feeling bad about who you are, and maybe you don't deserve connection and you don't deserve certain things because you are as a person you're not worthy. While guilt, on the other hand, would be where you feel bad about something you've done because it doesn't match up to your standard of either morals or values or something. And just going back to Sheehan a little bit, Sheehan's idea was that you could take that shame and turn it into guilt. And so when you actually show stuttering, then you're, in other words, you're bringing that shame above the surface by showing it allows it to decondition or recondition, as he would say, replace it with something else. So I love the idea of then making it a success.
Mhm.
But you still
Yes.
said that you didn't feel so great. So what's that about?
Well, I think at first you're so conditioned to, and also you're human when you're experiencing a situation where somebody might smirk or look away, even though you're setting yourself up for it at first, it takes a little bit of time to adjust and kind of accept that two things can be true. That's a success, and that's a stepping stone along the way to eventually dialing back that feeling or experience. But you can't just flip your feelings off. They're sort of changed as a byproduct of what it is you do that's different over and over again. And I know that you say this when I they think it's a Sheehan quote, but we're changed by what we do in stuttering and do again and do again. And
Mhm.
that's always sat with me. I remember hearing that early on.
Yeah, yeah. But I love your example of trying to get somebody to look away because it kind of makes you keep eye contact to see if they're looking away, right? So you have you're doing something good and at the same time. So you have to be watching to see if they're actually looking away. I mean, how do you, you're when this was first presented to you, was it presented, oh, this makes sense, because most people think that you go to speech therapy and someone's going to help you stay away from those really fearful situations or really shameful situations or not feel shame. In other words, help me so that I don't feel the shame anymore. Or people saying, I just decided I'm not going to feel that way anymore. In other words,
Mhm.
kind of suppressing that feeling. What was it like for you to first hear about it?
I mean, at first I thought these sort of things were nuts. I think my first experience was trying to get hung up on the phone, and I had to wrap my head around that. And there was celebrations happening of when people got hang up, they'd announce it, and everyone would be like, "Woo!" And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm first off still working on just adjusting to speaking on the telephone itself, let alone getting hung up on." So I think there was like a little element of eh, um, I was exposed as a part of a larger program, and I don't know that I was quite ready yet, but it was really neat too to see and to be able to look ahead at the same token. But I think I was also simultaneously so sick and tired of getting around things, and, and I think I was open to the potential of anything that could potentially make things easier. And it was already painful. And so I think that while it was crazy initially feeling or sounding, um, experiencing it for the first time really felt different too. This whole proactivity or planning to do something or planning for something, setting yourself up in advance, being on the offense rather than reactively on the defense was huge.
Yeah, that's a really good point because people ask me all the time, like, what is going on? What is the uh, what is the concept that we're dealing with here when we do shame busting or paradoxical assignments? What's the operation that's going on? And so I think what you mentioned, it's really about agency. So instead of experiencing shame when you don't want to, you're experiencing shame voluntarily. And that flips the whole scenario around. You know what I mean? Even though it's the same situation, somebody hung up on me, or you got a grimace, or um, uh, somebody filled in for you, or whatever it might be. Um, uh, the idea is that you were you were planning to make that happen and you did something to make that happen, and so that again, I'm not going to use the word control because I don't like the word control, but agency is certainly there. My favorite example is, because I don't stutter, I don't have that experience of trying to, although I do them in voluntary stuttering assignments, I do try to get somebody to fill in for me. But in just in life, if anybody wants to know like what a really good example is, I like to explain like you're walking somewhere and people are watching, like walking down a hallway or walking through a movie theater aisle or something like that, and you slip and you catch yourself, and you're you're embarrassed. I don't know why you're embarrassed when you slip, but you're supposed to have balance, I guess, and you pretend like it didn't happen. Like, oh, I'm fine. Like you pretend it didn't happen. And if somebody said, "Oh, are you okay?" It's sort of like, "Oh, yeah, I'm okay." And there's a little bit of embarrassment that you slipped. But if you did the same thing and you were kind of joking around and you went down the same hallway and you purposely like slid on some water or purposely, pretend you're a freshman in the dorm and you're sliding down the hallway on water or whatever they're sliding on.
Mhm.
um, at that point, you're very happy for people to notice you slipping. And so it's the same loss of balance, but in one condition, you it happened to you. And then the other condition, you're making it happen. I think that is so powerful. And I think it's a really powerful part of the shame busting activities
Mhm.
is devising the assignment, deciding what your success is, and then experiencing it. And it's really different. The shame that's experienced is very, very different when you experience the same thing. Somebody hangs up on you and you don't want them to, that's shame. Somebody hangs up on you and you wanted them to, that's not shame at that point. The same. And so I like the idea of that same activity, the same response resulting in something different internally. And that's what I love about paradoxical assignments. I really like them.
There's a little bit of noise here. There's a helicopter going around. So everyone, if it doesn't get blurred out by Zoom's wonderful noise cancellation, that's what's happening.
No, we're fine. We're fine.
Um, I'm with you. And I also like to, I think that example maybe I gave of the holding eye contact and kind of looking out for and hoping that someone does something that I might have usually perceived as this is something that would make me feel some degree of shame. But at a certain point, even just showing stuttering openly what was shame busting for me
Wow.
too. And so kind of crawling before you run in some respect, I think that is also important to throw out there because anytime that I allowed stuttering to be visible and visible enough that the listener sort of they're okay, this is a typical alert would go off. That was definitely a source of shame.
Yeah. And that makes me think also when you're doing an assignment to do something like open stuttering early on, to do something that is really fearful. Some of the counseling responses can be in the realm of a paradoxical assignment. So, like I could say to you, like Sarah, so you're open stuttering. That would be hard for you. Open stuttering would be something you don't want to do. It'd be very fearful, right? You mentioned that. If you open stuttered, what is something that you don't want to happen? What is it that is fearful about open stuttering? So, what might you say?
That the listener, and not even that they reacted, but that I could tell that they were paying enough attention that registered for them as as something that was not a typical disfluency. Like that was stuttering, and they registered it as such. So having them come to that conclusion, and maybe it's just maybe the evidence I would be looking for would be them really paying attention and connecting to me.
Yeah,
And
that would be really
said, well, there's no way they missed that.
yeah. So that's how this counseling, people always wonder, how do you get counseling integrated with the speech assignments? At that point, you would say something like, okay, go out and get somebody to register your stuttering. And that's
Mhm,
how somebody would use the paradoxical assignment for the open stuttering. So they really go hand in hand, so
mhm,
that if somebody is not willing just to go out and open stutter, you can be focused on what you're trying to get the listener to do, and that's the thing that you fear. And that's
mhm,
why these paradoxical assignments pair so beautifully with speech challenges like
mhm,
open stuttering.
mhm, mhm,
The other thing I love about them, and I think this was also historically as well, that um, the paradoxical assignments should be like exaggerated and humorous or fun,
mhm.
or there's some humor to them. um, do you find like that's a really cool part of them too, is that people try to get outrageous ones or things that would be funny?
Definitely. And I
Yeah.
actually remember a story early on that you've shared, when you and your husband were younger, and you would go on your ski trips, and he would want to stop at the gas stations or rest stops along the way. I think that was my first exposure to even considering, wait a second, like this doesn't have to be that deep. Like you can actually make it, I don't want to say a game, because I don't want to minimize or trivialize what this is like, but in a way you can, you can, utilize a little bit of humor, you can utilize a little bit of competition in order to take yourself out of your own head in some respect. And I think it allows you to go a little bit beyond your comfort zones and take more risks than maybe you might.
Yeah. And I think the element of competition is cool in group, and it's not like you're really competing with other people, but to share a fun story allows you to do something that's scary, because it's going to be something that is going to be considered a success and you can share it later.
Mhm,
So, talking about my husband, I'll just share one of my favorite um, paradoxical assignments that he's done. This is sort of like fun. So back in the day when telemarketers would call the house, they always
mm,
call it dinner time. I don't know if
mm,
you know that. They would always call it dinner time. And everybody would try to like block the call or ignore the call or get angry at them, and couldn't wait for the telemarketer to call, because his assignment was to try to get the telemarketer, who they were very persistent, to say, I gotta go. I gotta go. Not
mhm,
you. I'm sorry, I gotta go. No, the telemarketer is, I gotta go. So he would pick up the phone and it would be a telemarketer. Yes, telemarketer, days before caller ID. And they would begin their sales pitch, and he would ask them questions about the new phone plan or whatever, the insurance plan, whatever it was, asking more and more questions. And then, well, can you explain the difference between this and that? And asking all these details, and like, how much did you say it would be a month? Well, and all of these detailed questions. And I think the telemarketer got the idea that this is not going to be a sale. And so at some point they would say, I got to go, because, they need to get on to the next call.
mm.
And so when they would say, I got to go, my husband would look at me and go,
Did it.
yeah, yeah. And there is some fun in it,
Mhm,
but there's so many positives about that, because the idea is that no way is his stuttering going to bring up negativity in Shane. In other words, the more he stutters, the more he's going to reach his goal.
mhm,
And the idea that he's learning to say, he's doing another what we call assignments in arts, is saying one more thing, embellishing the conversation, taking more space in the conversation than he needs to, rather than taking little space in the conversation. So that's one of my favorite ones.
definitely. Yeah, one of my more recent ones, I live in a city, so I ride Uber a lot as a main source of transportation, and I'll I'll I think there are some drivers that want to have a conversation and others that, kind of prefer to listen to music, and I'm respectful of that. But occasionally I will plan to um, really start and initiate the conversation and kind of keep it going until they dwindle the conversation rather than me dwindling the conversation. And, of course, I'm respectful about it. And we've gotten into some really lovely conversations that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and it makes, I think and I think they help you really to peel back and understand the origin, deeper shame beliefs that you have in particular. And, I think the if I stutter too much, or if people know I stutter, they're not going to want to hold a conversation with me. Or, there are those, you uh, the reduction in the fear and then the byproduct effects that you get in relation to your reaction to the moment of stuttering, of course, but you're also discovering a lot about what is like deeper down and rooted for you.
And look at all the risks you're taking too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Risks that people would never take. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like we both have clients that we help and support as they develop paradoxical assignments and things like that, paradoxical assignments and shame busting activities. Um, do you ever do any that are not speech related?
Mm, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I have a,
I did.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go first.
No, I was just going to talk about a couple of, like a lot of them are speech related, getting somebody to hang up on you or getting a grimace or getting someone to fill in for you or, somebody like you say, who's going to dwindle the conversation or fade out of the conversation sooner. But, and I just thought about this because you brought up my husband. And my husband's fear, and I don't even know if ever told you this story, Sarah, but my husband's, um, um, one of his things about his stuttering journey was that he always, because of his stuttering, he always wanted to please other people. And he didn't want people to think negatively of him. And he didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. He wanted everybody to like him.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs to like me because they have to listen to my stuttering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one day, and this is Joe Sheehan gave him this assignment. I did not, this was not me. This is Joe Sheehan gave him this assignment. And he said to him when he left the clinic that day, he said, Peter, he said, go out and make somebody not like you today. He couldn't do it. It was really hard. He would sooner be able to open stutter, voluntary stutter, get somebody to hang up, get somebody to grimace, but get somebody not to like him was so, like you were talking about peeling away things. It was so ingrained. Um, and it was one of the things that shaped him around his stuttering is that being overly nice to people.
Think I need to take that one and run with it myself, but I'm not assigning myself that one.
Someone not to
I
like
can
you
relate.
today. Um, I had a client one day. This is just we'll talk about funny
Yeah.
paradoxical assignments for a moment if we can just share. So I had a client many years ago, and if they're listening now, they'll know exactly who they are. But self-admitted, kind of arrogant person. He didn't have any problem getting anybody not to like him. He was able to get people to not like him very easily.
Okay.
And he said if he didn't stutter, he'd be like a terror. He would be a terror. But he had certain things that um, we knew as a group, we knew would bring up shame and allow him to experience some shame, even though it wasn't exactly stuttering related. So he was kind of a wine connoisseur. Um, and kind of a wine snob to be exact. And so I said, how about this assignment? And I suggested the assignment, although generally I do not. We can talk about how we develop these assignments in a little bit, but I said, how about this one? Go into your wine shop where they know you, where you buy expensive wine, and buy a bottle of cheap wine.
Mhm.
And he said, "Ah, no problem." So he comes back to group, and I said, he says, I did it, tells everybody, I did it. They go, well, what happened? What'd you do? And he said, I picked up the bottle of cheap wine and I said, ah, Boone's Farm harkens back to my college days. And we all said,
Mm.
no, 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 you can't do that one. You can't do that one. So we made him go back and actually buy, not say a thing, just buy a bottle of cheap wine. He said he couldn't do it. It was really, really hard. Really, really hard.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
good.
So what do you think? I mean, do you think that, and I'm wondering if people listening would wonder if shame busting activities would generalize to speech, or are they in a completely different category? What do you think?
Mhm. No, I think they definitely generalize to speech. Is that a trick question?
Well, I don't know, because you said, I'm not sure if I could do that one to get people not to like me. I don't know if I could do that one.
Well, right. Well, I think I think in this process, I won't get us on a tangent, but we work on our relationship with our stuttering and our fear and shame related to it, but we learn a lot about ourselves too, and teasing apart what is what came first and what has just influenced our experience and what is innately us and or what has developed or transpired as a response to our experiences stuttering. And I think I'm an innate people pleaser, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and something to work on, and you're laughing and smiling because you
No,
know
I'm
me well.
laughing because do you think it's just Sarah, or is it related to stuttering? I mean, I'm a people pleaser kind of too, but maybe people would say no. I don't know. I don't know. People I haven't pleased would say no.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I I think it's me, and but I'm sure there's some overlap too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think for some people, again, not all, for some, certainly not my client, but for some, um, making yourself small because of stuttering and not wanting to be in the center of things where you're going to be responsible for leadership or talking or initiating things may generalize a little bit to maybe taking on the story of, well, I'm just shy and that's why I'm doing this. And so after a while of putting yourself out there as being shy or quiet or, um, not in the center of things, maybe people then act it out so much that they actually believe it.
Mhm.
And it isn't until you start changing that story by getting out there and talking more and doing more that you realize that you're not shy at all. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, Sarah, maybe you're not really a people pleaser.
Yeah, maybe. And
One day
there
Sarah's
are
gonna go, she's not gonna please you at all. And you're, like, that's Sarah. She's mean. Yeah.
I mean, there are examples where I don't maintain that exact through action.
That is hysterical. That's hysterical.
Uh,
Yeah. What do you think about, I'm a little concerned that we're making this too much fun and too easy. And
mhm,
it really isn't for some. So
mhm,
I'm going to share a story of something that happened to me literally yesterday in a session, and I want your take on it. So I was working with a client yesterday, and um, someone who's really not ready to do much showing of stuttering or taking on the role of a person who stutters, and um, is very cautious and moving slowly through their speech journey. And I sort of brought up this notion of uh, paradoxical assignment by taking something that they said and saying, can you imagine like trying to get somebody to do that? And the reaction was, and you could see it in the person's eyes, the reaction was terror. You can see. And so I said, I'm certainly not suggesting that. I'm sort of planting some seeds that in the future, that might be something that you choose to do.
Mhm.
I would never suggest it to you, would be you to bring it up. So I'm wondering, um, you know, for some people who, the notion of going out and doing the thing that really brings enormous um, negative emotional response, negative reactivity, how do we begin? Um, we can't, like, oh, we can't just say, go ahead and. This person also shared a negative therapy experience from a different practitioner where it was very like, well, go ahead, it's no big deal. Um,
Mhm.
and it was a big deal. So I'm just
Mhm.
wondering about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think kind of meeting the person where they are and knowing where they stand and also just their individual experience really guides this. And so it's really important to kind of establish that relationship and rapport and making some of that clinical decision making. But I think exploring it like you did, or even maybe a little broader conceptually, and having some kind of conversations where we just brainstorm the potential, what could be the benefits, or even more broadly, just what might that experience be like? Anything of value come from it potentially? What are some of the risks, and kind of weighing them could be and is, I think, a part of a lot of the getting that readiness scale to tip,
Hmm.
because it should be like you have said, it should be their choice to want to take something on. Of course, it doesn't usually come from a place of I'm an absolutely ready, but at least their idea and willingness to decide to um, take on a risk.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think exploring both sides of it, doing a lot of exploration, exploring the feelings and thoughts about um, about the fear to begin with,
Mhm.
and then almost trying to do that thing you fear. What could possibly happen,
Mhm.
and are you ready for any of those things to happen? I think is really important. And I also like the notion of like risk and benefits and those kinds of things. One of the things that last night um, was came up for me, and I realized how important it was, is that when you start discussing these things with a client, that I'm just saying this now for other clinicians who might be listening, is to be very, very observant of your client's reactivity when you're suggesting these things,
Mhm.
because you can read their face, their body language, and if they're having reactivity from the thought of doing it, even, that they're they're really not ready to do that. And even just thinking about it, this exploring is highly desensitizing for them. In other words, that could be just the idea of thinking about it could be a beginning of approaching that fear and that,
Mhm.
in other words, approaching that shame.
Mhm.
Um, so that was something that I realized because I did see it very clearly in their
Mhm.
reaction.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think even just broadly too, in understanding the action oriented nature of change within this journey, and without necessarily needing to be specific about a certain scenario, but just orienting ourselves around the concept of the fact that we have avoided to cope, or masked or concealed and kept ourselves from, only allows for things to grow,
Mhm.
in terms of our what if potential, our negativity, our worries. that kind of shame is almost like a visualization of kind of a growth, really. And so thinking through just the reality of that path, but without a certain timeline, can be like a helpful beginning phase too.
And I think based on what you're saying right now, it makes me think that just starting with the idea that feeling a feeling is okay.
Mhm.
That could be like the first step of, like, how stuttering is okay. Just
Mhm.
feeling a feeling, feeling fear, feeling shame, feeling anxious. Those those are feelings that are real. And by concealing, masking, suppression, all of those things, we're we're not allowing those to actually sort of come out and change. Not
Mhm.
without feeling them, we can't embrace them and let them go.
Mhm.
And I think that's a hard idea for a lot of people who I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And the other thing that it's making me think also is how we evaluate these paradoxical assignments.
Mm.
Like, the whole idea is, you do a paradoxical assignment and you come, like the example is, um, yeah, I went out and I got somebody to fill in for me. And then, how at the beginning, Sarah, you said, and I felt really awful.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
was a success. And so it reminds me of the evaluation is like number one, go out and plan, figure out what you're going to do, plan the assignment, pick the opportunity, all of that. And then after you take the action, count it as a success. And then you will have those feelings like you mentioned, right? The feeling of, yeah, but it felt terrible, it felt crappy, or yeah, but they thought I was X, or
Mhm.
what the thoughts of others, your own thinking, all of that floods in afterwards.
Mhm.
It's sort of the um, aftershock of this shame. Even
Mhm.
though you wanted to feel the shame, there's this aftershock.
Yeah.
And what I like to tell clients is sort of accept those things, but don't allow it to take away from the success.
Mhm.
It's really important. In other words, feel that, yeah, that was crappy. Yes, it was, but it was also a success.
Yeah.
So the feelings that you feel afterwards are part of the experience and they're okay.
Yeah.
That's one
I
of the
was
hardest
actually
things. Yeah.
was having a conversation with a client this morning about this, and we called this the everything in the kitchen sink stuff after we check in with what was our intention and what was our metric of defining success.
Mm.
And then here comes everything in the kitchen sink, because we are just we have conditioned ourselves to think that way. I think in many ways it's like we have been readers and detectors of how we're being perceived and how everything is registering externally and checking in with then and validating what we had internally predicted and hoped wouldn't be surfaced or triggered. And so we labeling it as that kind of gave it a separation in a way. And I again, I don't want to make light of it, but yeah, that was actually a
Oh,
conversation
yeah.
this morning.
But I like it, labeling it like the kitchen
Mhm.
sink. And,
Mhm.
I can even see an analogy down the line where, like, what's in the kitchen sink, and then
Mhm.
over time you clean up. There's less
Mhm.
and less in the kitchen sink.
Sure.
I love that.
The visual of getting the Clorox
I
out.
know. First, you have a whole bunch of stuff in the kitchen sink, and then after a while, you know what? There's a spoon in the kitchen sink. Um, that's kind of a cool way of looking at it. But there's always stuff in the kitchen sink after you do a
Always
steering
stuff.
assignment, right?
Always stuff. Always stuff. And that was that's how we're used to responding. And those were the signals that we would use to confirm that that was something we shouldn't do and that we should stay over here. And
Yeah.
so in a way, we have to expect the sink to be messy. And for a clean freak like me, in fact, this morning I woke up to a really messy sink that I didn't feel like dealing with last night, right? And it and I I have to tolerate it and understand, we got to expect it in
Yeah.
in ways.
Yeah, the expectations.
Mhm.
It just, I know I'm going to probably go down, this is going to take us down a different rabbit hole, which could be another conversation, but just the expectations after an assignment
Mhm.
where clients expect that, well, I did it and things didn't change. And
Mhm.
when they understand that they take on an assignment like something like shame busting, they're going to be doing it a lot before they see any change. And even if they even if they do it and they don't achieve the success they wanted to, um, um, that, I guess I want to say that that effort to do it is the success.
Mhm.
So sometimes that people say, "Well, I didn't get the person to hang up on me," so
Mhm.
or I didn't open stutter, or I didn't keep eye contact. And I said, if that were something that you just developed as an assignment, you wouldn't expect to do it every time. But
Mhm.
this idea that since it's an assignment, I should be successful, it should turn out right, is something that we're always trying to, I guess, allow the kitchen sink to be full with
Mhm.
something at all times and not feeling like you've got to clean it up and not feeling like your goal is the empty sink.
Mhm.
I'm just
Yeah,
thinking about that now. That the goal is not the empty sink. The goal is
right.
tolerating what's in it. Yeah.
Tolerating what's in it.
Yeah.
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 And looking at it all from a human perspective and lens too. We we I don't wake up with a clean sink every single morning, right? Or we have different expectations for ourselves in different realms of our lives, and to kind of adjust and acclimate within this journey to understand and have grace and flexibility too. I think that's a really important skill in how we continue in this journey too, because if we're too rigid about our expectations, then we're not on our own team along in this journey. We're becoming the opponent again, and being the opponent is what was so tricky and drove us to seek out change.
We could close out with the picture of Claire, my favorite picture of Claire with her tattoo that says, do
Mm.
the thing you fear.
Ooh, I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's really the whole notion of identify when you develop a paradoxical assignment, you're actually figuring out the thing you don't want to happen.
Yep.
And that's the thing you fear. And it's like, do it.
Right.
So we'll go out with that picture, I think.
I like that. I like that.
Until next time, everybody.
Until next time.